A man or woman convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. And we so often, as leaders in this industry, high D personalities want to drive our agenda. And that works for a while until we're not in the room anymore. Hey, welcome everybody to Keep the Change. This is a very exciting moment for me because I get to hang out with somebody I truly admire, who I've not had an opportunity to deep dive with. And I'm really anxious to break bread with this gentleman. Brian Kramer is the Executive Vice President at Cars Commerce and the General Manager of AccuTrade and a former General Manager with Toyota of Naples. He's been one of the few that were voted Automotive News 40 under 40. He has an incredible resume. And as I was looking through it last few days, I thought, man, I want to be just like him when I grow up. I mean, this guy is
what you wish for.
This guy is a stud in leadership. And he just had a great graduation. He had a special graduation weekend as we record this. So congratulations to your daughter. And welcome to Keep the Change, Brian.
No, thanks for having me, Bart. And happy anniversary to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Brian's so kind to refer to the anniversary that my wife and I had 10 years where we had all our kids join us in Coronado. It was a special moment. And we're back at it though, man. It's time to earn some of that money back. So Brian, tell us about your history, man. Give us your history on automotive, if you would be so kind, and the impact that you're having with Cars Commerce and what you're doing with used cars in the industry.
Well, I think I came into the industry at an interesting time because it was, in the mid 90s when computers were not really at the forefront. Everything was still analog, paper during that transition. And when I got into the business, there wasn't a lot of people that were my age. So most of the people I worked with were 20 years my senior. And I became a manager, not really because of my management leadership skills, because I knew how to use a computer early on. And then I had to figure everything else out after. But I had amazing mentors, I still do today, that I lean on and rely on. But I started off as a lot porter in an Oldsmobile dealership, became a sales manager at 21, GM at 24, and then was running multiple stores when I was 26. And then left the private life, went to Tampa with AutoNation, first publicly, run business where I really, and the Germains are world class, as everybody knows, who I worked for, in the first stint of my career. Then I went to AutoNation. I would say I got my doctorate in metrics, KPIs, operational efficiencies, really modeling dealerships. And then after that, Rick Germain bought Toyota of Naples, and Rick's a huge mentor of mine, as all the Germain brothers are, but he bought Toyota Naples back from his brother Bob, and we eventually bought Lincoln and Naples as well, and the Big Lot used car building down there. But he asked me, hey, would you like to come back to Germain, come down to Naples, really have a chance to really transform the industry, and was going to give me entrepreneurial, a lot of control, and it was very special. I liken it to like the 49ers back in the 80s with Eddie DeBartolo Jr. with Bill Walsh, where he just let him run the organization, even when Bill Walsh was getting all kinds of pressure from the media and critics. And I went through a lot of that because there was a huge J curve when I went there, and it got way worse before it got better. And had I not had the relationship that I had with Rick Germain, I probably, somebody would have blown me out probably, because there's a lot of pain that has to happen, as to transform a culture and transform a certain way of doing things from a legacy standpoint to a culture of innovation.
So what was it when you were looking at, I've got to change this, I want to transition from the way it used to be to the way I want it now? What were some of the things that you put into place back then that made it so hard? And I love, you're an Ohio guy, so am I. So I love the reference to Eddie D from Youngstown. And what an opportunity for you to go in and have full control at a young age to rock and roll and make this happen. What were your philosophies back then?
Well, early on when I first became a GM, I really didn't know what I didn't know. And luckily it wasn't a big store, so there wasn't a lot that I could break. That was different when I went to that Toyota store. The Toyota store was, it wasn't selling 600 cars yet, but it was still selling, 280 cars. So it wasn't an underperform by any means. Well, I guess depending on how you want to look at it from Southeast Toyota standards, maybe it was, but they hold themselves to a different elite standard. But when I was looking at it, we were very high in PVR, front end PVR specifically. And I just had to, even though it's very difficult, I think once you've seen it done a different way somewhere before, and you go into a store and maybe they haven't been exposed to, you can see that the F&I profits should be double of what they are. You've got way too much headcount in certain areas. Why are we not being more transparent and faster when it comes to internet response? Why are we not just being transparent with trade values online and decentralized everywhere? So I think that, as fast, and it's a huge, challenge for me still to this day, is as fast as I want to go, you can only go, Alex Vetter, CEO of Cars Commerce, always says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And you've got to, play football in high school. And, if you're, as a wedge buster on the kickoff team, and if you don't wait for your team and they're not there with you, it's not a good ending. And it's the same way in business. You can only go as fast as the team's willing to go. So I think that it's very important, as painful as it is, and most people don't have the patience for it, myself included. I forced myself is to sit there and ask and really get under the hood to figure out why it is that they don't want to quote, trade values online. Why do they not want to give the most aggressive internet price? Why are they not okay quoting interest rates or payments and just trying to be transactional online? And as I go around the country, I see a lot of dealerships that are doing 80, 90% of their business online very profitably, but uncovering the heuristics and the biases that are in the back of, dealership associates' subconscious, and figuring out what's really making them tick and what they're really afraid of. And you don't get any of that unless you get trust. So that's really where it all begins, is getting your employees to trust you, that you're not just it's not an aha moment that I'm trying to surprise you and you're going to have the wrong answer, to where they're really vulnerable and willing to let their guard down. And that takes time and just a lot of deposits, that you're sincere and genuine and authentic and trying to understand it, not just trying to be transactional to get to the next thing.
So talk to me a little bit. There's so many nuggets here, man. We do have 3 hours, right? Yeah. talk to me about Cars Commerce, what you're doing there, the transition to Cars Commerce, because that had to be a big decision. Here you are running this huge Toyota store in the best place on earth to live, Naples, Florida, and you decided to go outside of the dark side and go over to Cars Commerce. Tell us about that and the impact that you and Cars Commerce are making in the automobile industry right now.
So it started with Robert Hollinshead, who's the founder of Trade and Marketplace, Kelley Blue Book, Instacash Offer, and obviously AccuTrade. And he started mentoring me back in 2019 and was instrumental in, both Wendell Hardy and I looking at the used car business differently. And he's the biggest wholesaler in the history of the world and has done amazing things, but his mind is at such another level. He's one of those savants that I'm just blessed to have ever interacted with. But as I was going through it, he and I were working on some other projects, and came down to the fact of, he said, hey, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? And, I wanted to be a dealer. And he said, well, what if I gave you some equity in AccuTrade, but you'd have to leave the business? And I wasn't comfortable with that. Then I talked to Alex Vetter, and he said, and he and I have daughters that are similar ages. And he said, I've never missed a volleyball game. I've never done this. He goes, I don't know if I can promise you everything that somebody else can, but I can promise you that you'll get to see your kids grow up, and, you have weekends off. And, I still can't help myself but grinding. So that was the biggest part of the transition, was, because I self-induced, not really there for the first 15 years, around all the things that my kids. So I really got to know my 2 daughters over the last few years. As far as the auto industry goes, it's one of these situations. I use JM Family as a good litmus test or benchmark. There's a lot of vendors out there, endless amount of them. But we're planting the flag that we're the ones that are the most dealer centric, and we're actually saying no to revenue, which is a painful short-term decision in some cases, to not sell dealers data for a profit without them knowing about it, to not do things that I would consider, as a former dealer, malicious, without either a rev share model or making them aware of what are we doing with their data and being transparent with them about it. And I think that just like we've encountered over the last few years with dealerships, that the ones that are being transparent, you can use CarMax as a great example, but I wouldn't just say that. I would say AutoNation and Echo Park and a lot of other, you know, really well-run privately held groups that are just doing things the right way. That's such a differentiator, and we're seeing it in the profit of what they're doing. So at Cars Commerce, we're emulating that to be the most dealer centric, which means that we have to say no to a lot of potentially profitable endeavors in order to make sure that we're there for the dealers. But I think in the long run, that's what's going to separate us from just being a transactional model to being a true partner. And there's not many true partners in that space. There's a lot of, you know, widgets and a lot of different things that you can sign up for that come and go, but there's not a lot of true partners that are going to be there when the times get tough to help guide you through it in a consultative way.
So what's the biggest thing you've learned since you've gone outside of the dealer world into Cars Commerce and AccuTrade?
Oh, I would say how much I didn't know about media, marketing, data, how to communicate with data scientists. You know, you see, you know, what was cars.com, which is now Cars Commerce. And when I got there, you know, we've got, you know, thousands of employees. But what I didn't realize is there's only a few hundred that are actually dealer facing. The majority of them are all, you know, software engineers, data scientists that are in the background that are making everything happen. And the amount of infrastructure that goes into that was mind-boggling to me, the amount of work and the amount of refining and that sort of thing. And then the different language, it's almost like you need a Rosetta Stone to be able to connect the dots. So I look at myself as that Rosetta Stone to be able to sit in rooms where they're thinking about rolling something out and then be able to share the dealer's perspective before we actually present it to the dealers, almost as a, you know, like a steel man, as they're a straw man, as we're going through trying to poke holes in things before we actually present it to the dealers. And then making sure that we're making things really concise and not overloading them with too much information, just giving them the information that's needed at the moment they need it, that's actionable, and helping them instruct them on what they can do with that information just to make them more efficient.
So I just can't help it, man. Working with dealers, going into dealerships, doing leadership training. By the way, I was with AutoNation for a number of years. I don't know if you remember a guy named Ken Gregson, but Ken was a good buddy of mine, brought me in as a director of training. I was on a contract with them. And then we would go across the country putting Compass in all the stores. And I love to talk. Remember the 5 A's? I love to teach on the 5 A's. And then after that, the contract was done. Ken came up to me and said, I want you on the phone team. So I got to partner up with Traver and go around the country doing that. So great experience, but 100% I'm with you where I learned so much. In that period of time I was with them, it was phenomenal. And they loved to train. I mean, they trained beautifully every single day. And every Monday, it was the meetings with the GMs. What's our phone close this week? And what's so interesting about that, Brian, is I go into stores all the time, and stores have their e-leads and their phone close in one number, and they don't really know. I want your opinion on this because I might be antiquated, but they don't know what their phone close is. And when I ask them, a lot of times they said, I don't know, but I know what it is with all our leads. What's up with that?
Or they don't separate it in terms of new and used, because it can be completely different signals. And I think that there's a few reasons for that. And I completely agree with you. And it needs to be something that's measured. I was fortunate to be with the team at AutoNation. We were the #1 store in the nation in terms of phone close. But there was a lot of things that went into that, right? We had to, at one point, we were advertising too far out in a radius and we couldn't get the customers in. So our close was, you know, in the single digits. Once we really started marrying the marketing, the operational, listening to it, the skills training, having designated people in a designated room, which, you know, that whole play, and having role clarity as to you're going to be responsible for this hour and you're going to block everything out, which I took not just from that room, but into service drive acquisition, internet leads. You know, when COVID hit, every part of the business, I operated like that based on the success that I experienced through that. And we ended up getting to 21%, 22%, something like that, phone close. And it was different on new versus used, and it would ebb and flow. But I think that that's almost like a symphony where you have to keep tuning
Oh,
it and keep refining it. Because if you're weak on the phone like that, which, I hate to date myself, I'm almost 50 years old, but as we go forward, there's a lot of people that just aren't comfortable on the phone, and they didn't go through Traver training, and they don't even know who John Traver is. And they would rather text, which that's a very important piece, but it's a supplement. It's not a meal replacement for
no.
telephone skills. And I think that telephone skills percolate throughout the whole business, from internet to, if you're not good on the phone, you're not going to be good on the internet. You're not going to be good on text messaging. It's, to me, it's all about communication, but you need to know which one of those is out of tune so that you're, just tweaking it instead of trying to get a different instrument.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's so interesting to me how many, and I'd love to spend again an hour on this, but we can't, but how many stores do not, and this isn't bashing, this is not, I just hope they get it, have a phone guide that their people
Right.
have in front of them every time. Or how many people, when they do the phone guide and they make an appointment, don't give it to the manager and say, call this guy back in 50, have that 15-minute window that Traver and Stucker talked about, right? And if they don't make the appointment, which I'm betting my house that when your guys didn't make an appointment, the manager was on it in probably about 15 minutes to call the people back and see, how you doing, folks? We didn't get to help you. How can we help? And the numbers jump when we get the manager involved
Skyrocket.
either way, right? Yeah. Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
think every single phone up should be TO'd. At the end of
Yeah.
my career, we ended up having, they say you should have a save a deal meeting every day. It started when COVID hit, but we turned our conference room into a nonstop, never ending save a deal meeting that never ended. So we would just monitor those. And there was a sales manager in the room. I spent half my time in that room just watching, because it gave me a pulse as to everything that was going on. It was almost like mission control. But I'll tell you, on the phone room, I'll tell you a funny story, a very interesting story that I don't often share. We had a dealer visit one day, and Mike Maroney and Greg Revelle and David Kaler, Alan McLaren, everybody comes through they're going through the market tour, right? And Mike knew, as you know how Mike was or is, he knows all the numbers off top. He's photographic memory. And so
Yeah.
he knew what our phone close was on new and used, and how many, every new car model we had out. He knew everything, right? And yeah, so he's one of a kind. But what I was most impressed about with him was this: we had the phone room. Our top person was in there taking inbound phone calls, Steve Miscavige. And Mike was asking, he said, you're at 20 something percent phone close. Walk me through how are you doing it? And of course, I've been to corporate and everything. And I said, well, we're just following the process. And he goes, yeah, bullshit. He goes, there's no way, because our process doesn't generate 22%, 23% numbers. And I said, okay, well, we do it there's two ways we do it. He goes, okay, here we go. And I said, so if they're within 25 miles, we're using the Traver phone script. However, if they're past that on a radius, we've got a modified one, and I slip it out from underneath the desk water, and I'm like, the
Now the
secret,
safe.
right. And this is what we do. And these are the questions we ask, and we get managers involved almost immediately. And he goes, okay, well, let's role play. He goes, but first let's role play. I want you to role play our process to make sure. And this is what, we got, the whole, how it is. There's an entourage with him, like 20 people, they're all watching, and we're in this little tiny phone room. And he goes, you want me to go first? You want to go first? And I go, he goes, I just want to make sure you know it. He goes, but I'm happy to do it first just to refresh you. So the fact that he knew the script and he was willing to role play in front of all those people was so impressive to me. It was mind blowing that somebody at that level back then could do that. But so we did it, and he goes, okay, at least, the core competency is there. Now let me hear yours, and let's role play yours on somebody who's out of town. So we do it. And he turns around and he goes, hey, would you guys all agree that's way better? Because I'd love that. And they're all like confused. And he said, but here's the problem, Brian. Brought you in, we're going to put you into a bigger store, and then your track is to be a market president. You just made yourself unpromotable.
Whoa.
And I go, what do you mean? And he said, well, that's so advanced, but it's not scalable with our scale. As we keep on buying more stores, I can't sit. He goes, like Tyrone Price, we just brought him over from Nissan because you lost an F&I manager. We plugged him in an hour, and your F&I numbers went up $100 a copy. No training, no nothing. His systems, everything plugged in immediately. That's the power of our organization. He said, what you're doing is counterproductive to that. And we can't take your team and go promote them somewhere else. I can't take you out of the store anymore, because there's nobody that come in and backfill and know this play and be able to run this ship seamlessly. So now you capped yourself because your whole team is not scaled on this.
Hmm.
Do you understand where I'm going with this? And I hadn't looked at it from that perspective. I was only worried about my four walls. I'm worried about my net profit, my SOR, standard operating report. And I wasn't concerned with what everybody else was doing. But when he was a master, as you know, of sharing that holistic perspective, and I'll tell you what, after that, I stopped doing the other one. He didn't have to ask me. The point was clear, but it wasn't because he was putting a gun to my head saying, hey, if you don't do this is what's going to happen. It's because he made me see it through his lens and his eyes on why it didn't make sense for me at that time. And I think that's really what the key to leadership is, where you don't have to, put a gun to somebody's head. It's through true understanding, because that's sustainable and it doesn't have to be constantly managed.
Yeah. You remember J.E. Wolfington, right? Half a car. Remember that? Yeah. I was with them for a number of years. And J.E. used to say, Brian, and those who have listened to this podcast are rolling their eyes right now because I say it every week. A man or woman convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. And we so often, as leaders in this industry, high D personalities want to drive our agenda. And that works for a while until we're not in the room anymore, right? If they don't own it, they don't drive it. So that's a perfect example of what he did with you. Have you own that, not have him change your mind, have you change your mind because of what you wanted, because of what your next steps were. That's so good. So we're rolling now. So let's talk leadership, man. You've talked about having some incredible mentors, and oh my gosh, you've had some incredible mentors. So give us some key dealership isms for somebody listening to this that is in a dealership, wisdom that you gathered over the years from folks that would allow them to excel in today's market, right? And again, you and I haven't practiced this. I just know how sharp you are. I can ask you this question, you can come up with the answer immediately. So based on your people that have mentored you and your experience, what are some key points that have to be put in place in this marketplace to rock and roll?
I used to come in at 7:00 in the morning and I would sit there and gather all the metrics, and I would spend 2 hours going through everything and building out these spreadsheets to be able to be ready for the doc meeting, so that when the managers came in, I would say, what's up with this? What's up with this? Look at this. What about this? Right. And
every day, right?
Every day. Yeah. Every single day, except for Sunday.
Okay.
But what I learned from a lot of the more seasoned mentors that I had is they were like, why are you coming in and doing that? Why are your managers not getting that to you the night before when they leave? And it's significantly more powerful when your managers do it. And I remember there was one time when I was filling out a bunch of that stuff, went over, gave it to, Steve Germain, and turned around and he threw it in the trash, and I lost it, and, came back, and he basically told me it's not for you. It's not for me, these numbers, it's for you to know. And he started asking me all these questions of what was on the piece of paper, and I knew it off the top of my head. And he said, see, that's the key, is knowing. And by you entering that information, that's how you know. But I wasn't like percolating that down in a waterfall type method to where each one of my managers had to bring all of their information ready so that they knew. Now, A, it would make my life easier, but B, that's the key to developing future leaders, is making sure that they are texting, there's a cadence of accountability, that they're texting that information either the night before in a nightly text message, which I think is a non-negotiable. How many cars did you sell? How much money did you make? How many appointments do you have for tomorrow? How many trades did you take in is now the new thing that people add to that. But then the next morning, waiting and making sure that everybody knows that we're not starting the meeting until everybody brings their stuff. So if they didn't do it the night before, they didn't come in 15 minutes early to get their stuff, everybody has to wait. And now the whole day is delayed, to where that doesn't happen anymore. That's step one, is to make sure you know your numbers. Step two is to have a morning cadence every single day that's insanely consistent and insanely simple. And I'll give you an example. That's for the doc meeting, but then immediately after the doc meeting, you typically either go to a trade walk or sales training, depending on the sequence, right? And that's done in a very prescriptive way. But in a sales meeting, the salespeople should also be held to that standard. And I think this is what builds great cultures, is the salespeople, instead of hey, how many cars do you have out? Or going, which is the major mistake I made for years, going through and you've got 30 salespeople, or eventually I 60 something, and I got to sit there and write out, okay, how many cars did this person sell and this person sell? And you're doing every single morning for them versus asking them to immediately come up, okay, everybody get up and write how many X's you have on the board. Now, a lot of people that are control freaks will say, well, I'm not going to let them just tell us how many cars they sold. Well, no, they need to know how close they are to hitting each unit bonus. They need to know if there's a split deal. And I also had a rule, if you don't update it within 48 hours, we're not going to talk about it at the end of the month, because the typically is 2 days of this was a split deal. No, this was half of mine, and all the, the 3-card Monty that goes and exchanges hands. All of those paper cuts are just administrative bureaucracy time killers that paper cut you to death, and you bleed out that way, especially for new and inexperienced managers. That's the stuff that will overrun you and consume you, or keep you there like it did with me till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, because you're not controlling that part of the business and setting the cadence. And if you set the cadence on all those things by 11 o'clock in the morning, all of your stuff is done. I never did this, but I mean, technically dealers, I mean, the GMs could leave at 2 o'clock if they really wanted to. And there's people that do and still get it done. I don't prescribe to that, but the point is that you're now in control of whatever you want to do the rest of the day, instead of reacting to everything that's happening to you throughout the day.
I love it. And that's what we learned at AutoNation, right?
Yes.
Training calendar, exactly what the training calendar is for the next month. So there's never a secret.
And who's going to hold it?
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was in stores, I would do it for a month, but I bring all my managers in. After a month, even though I was the best trainer, just saying, I would let them do it, because they had to run with it. They had to, and I would watch them too. And if they were coming in just espousing their knowledge, we would have a meeting and say, hey, man, it's not about you. It's about them. They should be the one for 80% of the time practicing, drilling, rehearsing. I'm actually shocked. I circled it 10 times that Mike Maroney's in front of you role playing. Right. That's funny.
It's still mind-boggling for me to even contemplate that, and that he was comfortable being vulnerable enough to do it in front of all those people.
Yeah. I've got a friend of mine. When I first became a GSM a number of years ago, I had a friend of mine, Josh, and Josh was an AutoNation guy. And he had come because we were in the Phoenix market. I was a GSM at Power, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge in Phoenix, and he was a GM. And he came to me and gave me a 3-page doc. And it was how to be a GSM. Dude, I still have it today. As a matter of fact, I rewrote it in today's world, but I've been sharing it on LinkedIn. Because if I'm a GSM, I need that doc on how to do this. And I love your word cadence. It was about having a rhythm. 8:30, we're in the training meeting. At 8:41, we're out. At 8:41, we're walking the lot till 9:10. At 9:10, they go to their office and they tell us what they're going to do for the day. How many calls, how many texts, how many past customers. They had their cadence. Everybody had to turn them in to a manager early. And the cool thing about that, Brian, and again, this is all, none of this new to you, but the cool thing about having salespeople set their day up in writing, doing the Grant Cardone writing your goals down every day deal, is they send it to their manager. The manager can then just monitor it like an air traffic controller. And how are they doing? Then at the end of the day, we can land it and say, hey, buddy, you said you're going to send out 20 texts and you only sent out 10. What's up? What's your day like?
Why didn't we do what we said we were going to do?
Yes. Isn't that really, we talk about trust, but don't we need to learn as humans to trust ourselves, right? Leaders
I had
have
another mentor that taught me trust, and I used to misinterpret that word. And people would say, well, I don't know if I trust that person. And I used to take it personal and look at it differently. And then I went to a course, Urban Meyer's coach, Tim Kite, broke it down, and he said, there's 3 different types of trust.
Love him.
And now personal trust is one piece of it. Then there's technical trust, and then there's ethical and moral trust. And that's typically what early on, that's when I associated everything with ethical and moral trust. And, oh, I don't trust you. Well, that's now all of a sudden everybody starts getting emotionally involved and they get upset. But when you really deconstruct it and break it down into those 3 pieces, right? And you talk about ethical trust is, lie, cheat, steal, terminable offenses, right? But that's not really where the trust is violated, because if you hire good people and they're trustworthy, that's not really something. That's why everybody gets so defensive and so pissed when, hey, I don't know if I can trust you. But what I think it's very important for leaders to do is to break out. Okay, so let's talk about technical trust. And you know what I'm talking. Everybody listening to this knows what I'm talking about. You got a very high performing F&I manager, and they play in the gray. Let's say maybe harder into the paint, right? And there's some things they do that maybe may or not be legal, and who knows what that. But they run big numbers, and they know how to do the paperwork. They don't have CIT issues. They run huge numbers, but you also don't trust that what they're doing. Like if you wanted to have a family member or your mother go into the finance office with that person, you don't know if you'd be feeling 100% about that. But they're technical, they know how to do the job. But what I find the most, and I'm just using F&I as another example, is there's a lot of people that are very competent, that are ethical, that know how to do the job, that run big numbers in F&I. However, personal trust, which is when I tell you something, I'm going to do it. So, hey, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Make sure you get all the deals in the office for the controller before we leave, because tomorrow morning during the CIT meeting, I don't want to be caught with any surprises. No problem, Brian. I got you. Right. So what I hear when somebody says that to me is, hey, Brian, I promise you, no matter what, that those deals will be in there. And if they're not, I'm going to text you and give you a heads up as to why they couldn't happen. But most people don't get that level of clarity like I used to with my managers. And I would have that conversation with them. Hey, when you say this, here's what I hear. Might not be what you're saying, but I hear is, Brian, I promise you, no matter what, and you'll never be caught off guard, because if so, there's daylight between you and I. The little trait that Jim Bender taught me. So as I'm going through the different parts of the trust, personal trust is the one that's violated the most, because everybody's like, well, I'll get it tomorrow, or I'll respond to them, or I'll call that customer, and they don't text or call the customer and say, hey, I don't have any news for you at 8 o'clock at night. I didn't get to it, or I'm still working on this, waiting for an answer from the OEM, but I'll let you know tomorrow. And at least just let them know I have no news. But then all of a sudden they call the GM, and the F&I manager's off the next day. Hey, I've been calling. I left 3 voicemails for such and such. They're not calling me back. They lied to me. They said they would. Now they're confusing personal trust with ethical and moral trust. And that's where I think a lot of training and a lot of development needs to happen, a lot of just awareness, because people blur those things and they confuse them. And that's why people quit, get fired, and relationships get severed.
You know what, Brian? Where are you on the DISC scale? Do you know?
I mean, a little bit hot, on the right-hand side of the line in the eye.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And what I hear with you, though, is you're an incredibly strong communicator. That's what I hear. And I've heard you a lot on a lot of different shows and different programs at NADA. You communicate so well. And I think what I've learned, and I'm learning, is that so many people today can't have those crucial conversations. And if you can't have a crucial conversation, it breaks down trust immediately. But what you just said was an example of crucial conversation. You need to have the conversation in the moment, not wait, get it done. And that's where massive trust is built too, right? Because they know there's no gray area there. I love what Gallup says about being a great coach. We all misunderstand what coaching is. We think of Urban Meyer. We don't think of my therapist. But great coaches, obviously, they set expectations, both sides, right? Great coaches coach all the time, all day long. Great coaches hold people accountable. And that's what
I high standard.
Yes, because you run at a high standard, and your expectations is they should too. That's how you grow leaders, right? Because they see, what has he done? Well, if I want to be like him, I better follow that way. And you're so good at that. So thank you for that. We can't leave today without getting through these 10 pieces, though, there, my friend. So we've talked about the reports in the morning and having them do it. We've talked about cadence, having a rhythm. We've talked about having trust. Give me those other ones, because, see, as we leave today, I want to go get a dealership, and I want to make sure I run it beautifully. Not true. I'll let somebody else.
You just touched on one of them. And one of them was, and I've had it, John Melashenko, who used to run Germain Motor Company. Prior to that, he ran Toyota sales for the US. I was blessed, right time, right place. We get an open point Lexus store, and nobody wanted to go over there. And I talked to Rick Germain. I go, hey, this seems like a great opportunity because nobody's going over there. So this should be I think I was 19 or 20 years old. That's how I became sales manager so young, There was no competition because everybody stayed at the old legacy store. So I went over there with John to open up this open point. Now we opened it up 3 or 4 days before September 11th, 2001. So there was a lot of learning that occurred throughout that, but I was able to be right next to him before he became the COO of Germain to, you know, to be basically his GSM to develop and really teach me data and how to make it actionable. But one of the things that he did, which used to drive me crazy, and I didn't understand it at the time, among many things that he did, was he used the Toyota analogy of pulling the Ondon cord, right, and shutting down the assembly line. So it didn't matter end of the month, middle, whatever. If you're in the middle of something and there's something that's an issue with leadership, he's pulling the Ondon cord, shutting it down. Everybody's in the conference room, and we're going to have that hard conversation, not tomorrow, tonight, right now. And he would say, and I lived this afterward, maybe to a fault, but he said, look, I don't care if we miss the number. We're not going to kick this can down the road and keep on postponing and procrastinating. We're going to handle this immediately, because what happens is tomorrow's the day off, and all of a sudden, yeah, you know what? It's been 3 or 4 days. Everything seems to be fine now. We don't need to address what happened, which was completely out of bounds and unacceptable to all parties involved. So now, but the two people that are in an argument are internalizing that, festering. You think it's calm, but it's not. Most people don't have the discipline because, oh, what if we miss the number? What if we do this? They live so much in these 30-day sprints that they're not looking at the big picture, and they won't pull the Ondon cord, just like Toyota. Toyota pulls it. Does every auto manufacturer do it if there's a blemish or something, a defect? And not only that, I mean, I've watched this at one of the Lexus plants where they celebrate. They don't just allow them to pull it. It's a celebration, and they applaud them for finding a defect. And it's like a celebration for finding something wrong. You would think that the insecurity of, oh, I don't want to roll such and such, which is another critical error. Hey, you didn't hear this from me, but such and such, I just want to bring it to your attention, instead of just having such a level of trust that you can call each other out because you care so much towards the common purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, that everybody accepts it. They might not like it, but then that person's going to own it, because you've already all had an agreement as to what's acceptable and what's not. So it shouldn't be any surprise of rolling somebody, because everybody knows that's unacceptable. To not bring it to somebody's attention is a worse offense than not bringing it up.
That's so good. So keep going. You got these 10 things.
So as I'm going back through, I would say that one of the things that I was focusing on, I'll just go back to 2019 when Robert Hollinshead started mentoring me, and he said, if you wholesale more cars, you would retail more cars. And I was looking at it in simple math, and I said, well, Bob, that doesn't make any sense. If I wholesale more cars, I'm going to sell less. And he said, no. He goes, your mindset is built, you're inside of a box that you're not able to jump out of. Because you're not okay wholesaling a bunch of cars, you don't acquire them all. So I started looking at it. Okay, well, for every 100 cars I sell, how many cars am I taking in on trade? And I think at that time we were at 400 or 500 cars, and we were less than 50% of them having a trade-in. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Where are all these trade-ins going? So now you start trying to figure it out, and you realize that if 70% of the transactions should have a trade and you're at 45%, there's something going on. You got to listen to the phone calls. You got to look at the internet leads. How are we handling this? Are we removing friction for our employees? Are we making it easier for them to provide that information, or is it harder? So once I finally removed some of the roadblocks, it's actually, how I was introduced to AccuTrade. I took the AccuTrade link, put it in the CRM, and I pulled everybody in, and I said, hey, we're going to do a little experiment. You can send out, everybody thought it was a setup, but I said, you can send out sight unseen appraisals. Then this was in 19. It's not like we're talking about 2024. You can send out sight unseen appraisals from this link. If a customer has it, you don't need to sit there and tap dance and ask them 10,000 questions. If they say, hey, what's my trade worth? No problem. What's the best mobile number for me to text it to you? And you can appraise it yourself. And no slick word tracks or anything fancy. It was just like that. But now what do I have? I have the first name, last name, email address, cell phone number. So now I can retarget them. I can market to them. I can do save a deal meetings. I can switch them to payment. I can have managers TO the deal. The app, there's only 26% of trades in a or of leads in a CRM have a trade-in attached to it, because nobody's asked that question yet, because it's uncomfortable. And the BDC doesn't want to ask it, because what if they don't come in? And the salespeople are like, why are you going to mess up my deal? I just want to sell the car. And what's it affect their pay? Nothing. So once we did that, I realized that instead of me getting 5 to 10 CarMax price matches a day, the price matches stopped. Now I I didn't realize it at the time, but now I had control over my process. Prior to that, I had a process, but it was not one that I invented. It was not one I had control over. And CarMax was sucking all the data and Carvana out of my leads because my staff was looking left, right, and hey, you didn't hear this from me, but if you get on CarMax.com, they'll beat it by $500. So everybody came in with one of these things, but a lot of them came in with no trade. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy by me withholding information versus setting standards that this is where you're going to operate within. And if you violate it, then you'll go back to the legacy way and you'll wait 20 minutes for us to appraise a car and all the other things that used to have to happen. So don't do that. Right. And then because then we're not going to trust you, and that's not good. But that's one huge thing when it comes to silencing appraisals. And once we did that, among a couple other little tweaks, we didn't have to go to the auction anymore. But it all started with Holland's Head saying, you've got to just try to acquire them all and quit worrying about how much you're going to make. Is it retail, wholesale, and overthinking it. Same thing goes, Grant Cardone, I met him in the mid 90s. And he was back then living out of like an Oldsmobile, driving from place to place. And I think he was on the road 340 days a year. So he lived with his mom, technically, is where all his bills went. But he came into this Oldsmobile GMC Pontiac store that I was at. And up in the lunchroom, there's maybe like 8 of us and him. And he's talking about being transparent, give 100% of the time, give everybody a price. And back then, if terms and conditions are agreeable, Bart will take delivery now. It couldn't even be today, but now. And if you didn't have that with something tangible, glue, a shoe, a credit card or something, you weren't going to get payments. So you weren't, which is going to be a sky high Foursquare. And all you were allowed to say was, how comfortable are you with the money down after they're trying to choke you? I'm going to kill you, kid. What is this? And I understand how you feel, Bart. How comfortable are you with the money down? And all of it went through it, right? So Cardone, I remember getting my teeth kicked in. Should I go back to college? And he said, hey, I want to try something with you. I just need you to just say exactly what I tell you to say. I'm like, no problem. Hey, because back then I was like Ron Burgundy. I just read off the teleprompter. He said, I want you to, because I got a program called Up and Show. I go, what is it? You walk up to the customers and ask them if you can show them how to improve your situation on the service drive. He goes, you wrote service for a little while, right? Yeah. Mr. Goodwrench. He said, so just do that. So second customer I greet, it's a longer story, but a lot of other craziness in between, but we ended up, trading them out of the vehicle. And fast forward, whatever that is, 30 years later, I'm at the Toyota store and we're using all this high-tech gadgetry and widgets and apps and equity mining tools and all this technology and not really selling anymore, buying any more cars. And I realized that we had gotten to a point of digital maturity where we were just pre-qualifying customers with the tools instead of using it for what it was intended to do. I'm like, hey, what's going on with that? Oh, they're just in for service. What about them? They're just in for service. And their payments, they're only paying 3%. And these people they've got it all figured out, right? As to why every single person in the whole showroom can't buy. Salespeople, managers, everybody. And I said, okay. So I called the vendor, canceled it, unplugged it. And I was going to do it for like 60 days. And everybody, sort of losing their minds. Oh my God, what about our equity mining program? And I said, I don't really care if somebody has equity. I don't care if they have negative equity. I don't care about any of that. So here's what we're going to do. I call it Up and Show. You're going to walk up to customers with the AccuTrade app and you're going to show them what their car is worth. And that was a really revolutionary thing, that by taking all this technology and really just peeling it back to the bare essentials. And what we found is that over half the people didn't even want the car they were in. So by telling them, hey, what if I could trade you out of your car and get you in a similar car, keep payment close to what you're paying now with little or no money down? Obviously, I've said that a few times. I was alienating half my customers, right? That they didn't even want it. Plus, I think it's like 11% of people have equity. If you're trying to do that today, you're not appealing to 89% of the customers or all the people that finance through USAA and credit unions and the majority of the people that we wrapped up, I think they did 153 last month off the drive of my old store, are from people that didn't buy there, or they're new, or they finance somewhere else, or they're never going to show up in an equity mining tool. And really, what's it matter what they owe or anything? I mean, I'm sure you and I both, the last cars we bought are not at the same payment of the previous car prior to that. And it's a different vehicle. It's a different, same thing with our wives. I mean, it's just, all that stuff is just noise that just interfere. It's like somebody at the desk saying, hey, what are you paying now? How much money do you want to put down? what the hell does any of that have to do with taking care of the customer? It doesn't
Mm,
matter. That's like self-fulfilling information that the desk wants to know. For what good reason? There isn't one. And they can't really ever justify why they need to know that. Because if
mm.
you're going to hit everybody, as you know, consistently 100% of the time with the same money down, the same way, 100% of the customers, there's no sense in asking those questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Isn't that funny? We ask those questions, and the salesperson is like hammered to ask those questions. Then they go into the boss, they ignores all of them.
Right. Right.
Any of the answers. Well, boss, they want $2,000 down. He hits you at 55. None of the stuff
Right.
that they spent 45 minutes gathering is
Right.
put to use. It's black noise. They didn't hear a word. Yeah. And we spend years teaching them that and doing that in our industry. And then when we just made it easier, and that's what I hear about you, Brian, you're very creative. You're obviously brilliant. And you've taken the information people have given you and you've acted on it and you keep it simple. I mean, I think brilliant people keep things simple, right? So, and that's what I hear
If
you're
an
saying.
SOP is more than one page, it's too much. And you're right. It's incredibly hard to, we do it right now with the product enhancements that we're doing across Cars Commerce. And I know I frustrate a lot of people, but I keep on saying they're, the dealer's not going to log in for this. You've got to push it into the CRM. You have to make it easy. You have to, just like the friction removal for the salespeople on sight unseen appraisals, our job now is to remove the friction for dealers and not have to log into our tools, that we integrate with their tools and make it easier for them.
That's so good. So I'd like to spend another hour, but I'm going to respect your time. So as we start wrapping up here, I'd like to, if a dealer is, again, kind of goes back to, you've given us more than 10 wonderful things to do when we get into a car dealership. Just the nuggets are so good. But if somebody's out there struggling, you know what they're struggling with. What are some of the solutions that maybe we haven't talked about thus far? We've talked about used cars. We've talked about processes in place. We've talked about being consistent in the processes. We've talked about keeping it simple. We've talked about be customer focused, and in your world, be dealer focused. What are, for somebody who's out there thinking, man, this is just a tough gig for me in my dealership, what advice would you give them simply, if there's a simple answer, to really have some success in this marketplace with all the minutia that's going on out there, Brian?
To focus on doing less, which is counterintuitive. I would focus on, there was points where I was struggling at Lex the Clearwater. And I remember, last 10 days of the month, a lot of pressure coming on. And we ended up breaking some all-time records, but it didn't feel like that on the 20th. And I remember posting on the back of the sales tower's, door, if it doesn't involve setting an appointment, confirming an appointment, selling a car, or saving a deal, let's talk about it next month.
Ooh,
which
love that.
which just kept on perpetuating, because there's so many sidebar conversations you can get wrapped up into in the whirlwind, like a 4DX type environment. And I remember, and I had to complain with HR from my controller about it. And she said, I've got something important I need to talk to him about. And I said, well, you can either talk about it at 4:00 p.m. We can talk about it before business hours. But in between those, for the next 10 days, we're retail full throttle and nothing
Oof,
else. And
I love
that's
it.
what's the most important thing. And I think that so many young leaders look at everything, they get overwhelmed. I did, and start getting sucked up into this whirlwind. And I remember David Kaler, who's one of maybe my top mentor, who was most recently COO of AutoNation. And he told me the day that he put me in the store when I was 24 years old at that Mercedes store with Jermaine. And he said, Brian, because you just came out of a high volume Lexus store. This store's doing, what in a month, what you did on a Saturday. So you don't have the staff, you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have all the resources. It's on a one-way street that shuts down on Saturdays during Ohio State football games for the parade. So, I mean, there's a lot of challenges that were, I had a union petition filed on me the third day. He goes, you can literally sit there and spend your entire day saving the world, saving CSI issues, talking to upset customers, doing all these different things. And he said, at the end of the day, all I'm going to do is call you, and it ended up becoming my nightly text. And I'm going to ask you the only things that matter. how many cars did you sell? How much money did you make? And how many appointments do you have set for tomorrow? And he said, so you just need to remember that every single night before you leave, what the most important things are. Because I'm not going to ask you how many customers did you save and how many CSI grenades did you jump on and all these other things. He would, guess what? That's the price of admission. It's what you signed up for. All that matters is how many points you put on the board, and that's how many cars did you sell, how much money did you make, and how many appointments do you have for tomorrow. He said, that's all I care about, and that's all I want to know, and that's the only thing that matters at the end of the day. And I think that's very easy for a young leader to lose sight of those things. So there has to be a North Star that that there's a cadence of accountability coming. And if you're a GM, your managers better be worried about that. Hey, it's 6:00. We don't have any cars out. Let's get going. Let's get somebody on the phone. Who can we get in here tonight? Because you know that you're walking down that green mile. But if you don't have that cadence, and if you're a GM and you're not asking that question at 8:00 every single night, then your managers will behave differently. So I think that, to me, is the simplest way to distill it down.
And now, how many trades do you have?
Right? Now, how many trades do you have?
Hey, thank you.
50% or more.
Yeah, amen. Well, by the way, if you want to gather some great knowledge from Brian, you're on Fridays with David Long on everything used cars. Tell us a little bit about how they can gather Brian Kramerisms and your philosophies on leadership. How would they tap into your expertise going forward here?
I've got a YouTube channel now that's at Brian Kramer. So it's easy to look up. I was lucky to get that handle. But I posted something on LinkedIn earlier today, but I try to post different things from what I'm seeing around the country, because just as much as I see opportunity, I'm also learning some best practices from some of the best dealers in the country. So I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook as Brian Kramer FL, Instagram is Kramer Brian, TikTok is Kramer Brian. So any feedback or any information that anybody wants to know, you feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to give back for all the mentors that poured into me.
Well, I got to tell you, you've been just a class act with me, and you were so gracious at NADA, and you've been so gracious in joining me here. Thank you so much. I know our audience is going to love this, and I hope that we can do this again, because your knowledge, it just flows out the doors. And I'm just so, again, just blown away by the wisdom that you're bringing to the table. Not only are you brilliant in today's car world, but you stay true to a lot of the isms and the philosophies of what made this industry great, and you keep it so simple. And I really appreciate you bringing those two pieces together. Thank you, Brian. Love having you on Keep the Change, and I look forward to doing it another time.
Thanks, Bart. I appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. Give us some feedback, and we'll talk to you next time on Keep the Change.